But this snow did not last long, at least not here on the southern side, and soon I could turn back to garden tasks that my long absence had left incomplete. One of them was cutting back the lavender. I was late doing it, and though I was unsure of the prospects, I could not throw away the remains. Lavender cuttings root easily, and that is good, for I have big plans for one of the terraces above the house. If I ever get to stay here permanently, I would like to take up beekeeping. But my love for wild bees means I want to provide more food sources so as not to crowd them out. After a few months, I'm getting around to work on the terraces in the garden extension again. This piece of land has come a long way since work started here in September last year. I've decided to create this bay in the wall, which will eventually receive a semi-underground garden tool shed. When it came to wall building, 2024, despite my absences, has things to show for it. For I've also returned to the area above the house. I'm repairing terracing that has collapsed, stabilizing some areas, building up new ones, and hopefully we'll end up with 3 levels, a large pond, a new planting space. And the abundance of rock is also fueling the work in the lower garden. But most of all, it tires me out when computer work gets too monotonous. At the end of this episode, let me take you back once more to the pilgrimage through Le Marche. So far in this series, we have looked at religion as a virtue connected to justice and distinguished it from what I have, for lack of a better term, called modern spirituality, in the sense of an amorphous search for something higher, which on a practical level is often more about the individual than any fundamental relationship to something beyond the self. We have then said that this gives religion a concreteness which manifests in truth claims and finds an expression in acts of worship, something that is only possible because worship needs to be directed to something concrete, whether real or imagined. Modern spirituality, on the other hand, I suggested, typically has no well-defined object of worship. If it had one, it would become a religion in the sense we use the term here, with its own story of the world, its own rites, rules, and commands. We have noted that proponents of modern spirituality might see the lack of concreteness as a winning feature. For who could claim knowledge of the divine as a mere mortal? Yet, in my response, I have proposed that one can indeed claim knowledge without claiming all knowledge. So, religion can be both intellectually honest and humble. Its bare minimum claim is that we know enough to know what to worship. But maybe the reason for the objection to claims of knowledge had a different underlying cause to begin with. It could be the aforementioned postmodern parentage of this kind of spirituality, which is skeptical when it comes to any truth claims. It could also be practical concerns, such as the desire for peace, which seems to be promised by inclusivity. Modern spirituality is felt to avoid what is often perceived as the intolerance of religions. I understand the desire to get along, and being nice, non-offensive, and conflict-averse may appear as a modern virtue. But I want to suggest two things. The first is, the supposed inclusivity is not actually inclusive. The second one is, this kind of inclusivity is not even desirable. It is based on fragility and is not robust. What do I mean by the first? If you go around telling everyone that their clear conviction is somehow faulty, and they should rather follow your example and deeper insight, you might be right or you might be wrong. But you're not being more inclusive. You're just proposing a different set of beliefs, one of which is that people who differ from you have gotten it wrong. So if you suggest that Buddhism, Islam and Christianity and anyone else who begs to differ from your spiritual insight have not gotten it right, you're no different from, say, an ordinary Muslim telling a Christian that he has got something wrong. And if you think you are distilling the essence of religions by reducing all of them to what you think is fundamental to your own spirituality, it is no different. Because the adherents of those very concrete religions will see themselves misrepresented by you. It might sound nice to say that Buddha, Jesus and Muhammad were all enlightened beings, essentially desiring the same. But it is a thesis in contrast with what their respective believers hold. So all you're doing is setting up an alternative view. As such, it is not more inclusive than any other. Don't get me wrong. I, for one, think that this is perfectly fair. I don't object to you having a different proposal. I object to the claim that such a different proposal would be more inclusive. By smashing different views together, disregarding how the proponents of those views themselves understand them, does not make you a unifier. It makes you eclectic, not inclusive. Again, I don't have a problem with differing views. When a question is difficult, different attempts at answering it are bound to appear and contradict each other. And this brings me to the second point. This kind of false pretense inclusivity is not even desirable. What is desirable is that we take a hard look at things and work them out as best as we can. Setting up another truth claim is fine. But what matters is the truth of the truth claim. I'd rather quarrel and struggle for an answer than pretend that there is no question. I'd rather have an argument and suffer frustration than to pretend that the truth does not matter. And that is my accusation at some of these currents of modern spirituality. I'm fine with them proposing a different reading of history. I'm fine with them telling me that I'm wrong. I'm not fine with them pretending to be more inclusive, despite the fact that they exclude what I hold to be true. And I would be even less fine with anyone suggesting that the very question of truth in these matters does not matter. In this I follow my favorite author, G.K. Chesterton. In the first book of his I ever picked up browsing the library, I opened to a page and read about George Bernard Shaw that he was, in Chesterton's view, a man whose philosophy was quite solid, quite coherent, and quite wrong. I laughed out loud, worth earning a stern look from a librarian, if there had been any. A perfect joke. Set up an expectation and then subvert the expectation in the punchline. That is how humor works. The book from which this quote is taken is called Heretics, who, as Chesterton explains, are those whose view of things has the hardihood to differ from his own. Let me quote him in some length on the importance of right belief from that very introductory chapter. It is foolish, generally speaking, for a philosopher to set fire to another philosopher in Smithfield Market because they do not agree in their theory of the universe. That was done very frequently in the last decadence of the Middle Ages, and it failed altogether in its object. But there is one thing that is infinitely more absurd and unpractical than burning a man for his philosophy. This is the habit of saying that his philosophy does not matter. And this is done universally in the 20th century, in the decadence of the Great Revolutionary period. General theories are everywhere condemned. The doctrine of the rights of man is dismissed with the doctrine of the fall of man. Atheism itself is too theological for us today. Revolution itself is too much of a system. Liberty itself is too much of a restraint. We will have no generalizations. Mr. Bernard Shaw has put the view in a perfect epigram. The golden rule is that there is no golden rule. We are more and more to discuss details in art, politics, literature. A man's opinion on tram cars matters. His opinion on Botticelli matters. His opinion on all things does not matter. He may turn over and explore a million objects, but he must not find that strange object, the universe. For if he does, he will have a religion and be lost. Everything matters, except everything. Examples are scarcely needed of this total levity on the subject of cosmic philosophy. Examples are scarcely needed to show that whatever else we think of as affecting practical affairs, we do not think it matters whether a man is a pessimist or an optimist, a Cartesian or a Hegelian, a materialist or a spiritualist. Let me, however, take a random instance. At any innocent tea table, we may easily hear a man say, "Life is not worth living." We regard it as we regard the statement that it is a fine day. Nobody thinks that it can possibly have any serious effect on the man or on the world. And yet, if that utterance were really believed, the world would stand on its head. Murderers would be given medals for saving man from life. Firemen would be denounced for keeping man from death. Poisons would be used as medicines. Doctors would be called in when people were well. The Royal Humane Society would be rooted out like a horde of assassins. Yet we never speculate as to whether the conversational pessimist will strengthen or disorganize society. For we are convinced that theories do not matter. This was certainly not the idea of those who introduced our freedom. When the old liberals removed the gags from all the heresies, their idea was that religion and philosophical discoveries might thus be made. Their view was that cosmic truth was so important that everyone ought to bear independent testimony. The modern idea is that cosmic truth is so unimportant that it cannot matter what anyone says. The former freed inquiry as men lose a noble hound. The latter frees inquiry as men fling back into the sea a fish unfit for eating. Never has there been so little discussion about the nature of man as now, when for the first time anyone can discuss it. The old restriction meant that only the orthodox were allowed to discuss religion. Modern liberty means that nobody is allowed to discuss it. If modern spirituality is proposed as an alternative to religion because it is supposedly more inclusive, then, as we have seen, it fails. It is not more inclusive. It is just yet another view of the universe, a view that may be deliberately nebulous so it can pretend to include other religions while flatly contradicting those religions on their own terms. If, on the other hand, modern spirituality serves to avoid hard questions of truth for the sake of avoiding arguments and for the sake of peace, I contend that it serves a false peace. It devalues the most important questions, the quest for the most important answers. Let the struggle for those answers be hard and at times frustrating, but let it not be called unimportant or unnecessary.